Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this instalment of Art UK's Art Unlocked in collaboration with Bloomberg Philanthropies. My name is Hannah Lyons, and I am the curator of the University Art Collections here at the University of Reading. We were absolutely thrilled when Art UK invited us to be part of this series of special talks. And before I begin, we would like to thank Art UK for organising free events such as this one, and for all of their hard work in making our UK collections more accessible to the public. So tonight, I'm going to introduce you to the University of Reading's diverse and developing art collection. I'll explain how it came into being, and then, over the course of the next 30 minutes or so, we will work through some key artworks in the collection, considering who, how, and why they were created, but also how they came to find a permanent home here at the university. As I've only recently taken on the role of Curator of Art this spring of 2023, it's been a real treat writing this talk, allowing me to delve deeper into our eclectic but wonderful collection. And so I look forward to sharing it with you over the next half an hour. But first, a little bit of context. I'm starting this presentation with an image of the former St Andrew's Hall at the University of Reading's London Road campus. This beautiful building, designed in 1880 by the celebrated Victorian architect Alfred Waterhouse, is the home of the university's art collection, its archive and special collections, and the university's Museum of English Rural Life. Like this building, the origins of the University of Reading also date back to the late 19th century, and perhaps rather surprisingly, are intimately tied up with the study and practice of art. Now, to really go back to the beginning, we need to start in 1851, with the highly successful Great Exhibition of the Works of Industry of All Nations, which saw 6 million people visit the Crystal Palace in Hyde Park to enjoy a wide range of industrial design from across the world. Following the success of the Great Exhibition, schools of art and science were established around the country. The town of Reading got an art school in 1860, and a school of science followed 10 years later. In 1882, they merged and formed a miniature technical school for the men and women of the town. And indeed, these three photographs on your screen from around 1890 show some of the men and women who undertook classes at Reading's art school. You can see students studying from the life in the middle photograph, and also undertaking printmaking classes in the final image. The school taught day and evening pupils, and a board of purposes from this time highlights, and I quote, "The objects of the school are to promote the growth of industrial art, to make drawing a part of general education, and to train those who desire to follow art as a profession." Fast forward 10 years, and these schools became part of the Oxford University Extension College movement, as the nearby University of Oxford pushed to make university-level education more affordable and accessible. It was in 1926, between the two world wars, that the Extension College was granted a royal charter and thus became the University of Reading. So, having briefly covered the history of our university, including the central role that art has played since its inception, we will move on to the formation of our art collection. Today, this comprises of around 1,000 works, including paintings, drawings, prints, and sculpture. These artworks date from around the 16th century through to the present day. We display the collection in and around the university's various buildings and campuses, and we have a busy loan programme. For example, at the moment, we currently have paintings and drawings generously on loan from the John Golding Trust. And we also commission public art such as sculpture and installations, which you can enjoy in the grounds of our White Knights campus. But when did the university begin acquiring work? And what did it actually acquire? Well, a remarkable fact is that the University of Reading never actually intended to collect artworks. Like many universities, there was never a deliberate nor strategic decision to collect. Rather, artworks were amassed ad hoc by individual academics or departments. Collecting was undertaken for a variety of reasons. Tutors, such as those who taught in the School of Fine Art, amassed artworks for pedagogical purposes. Others, such as those in the History of Art department, acquired artworks as a stimulus for their own research, while some staff simply took a shine to a particular piece and wanted it for general decoration, to enhance their buildings, as well as the student experience. It was only 8 years ago, in 2015, that all university-owned artwork was brought under central management as part of a formal collection. And now, if you'll indulge me, I'm going to highlight some of my key works. Many of the artworks in our care have been gifted to the university over the years, and I'd like to start by focusing our attention on one such gift. This exquisite chalk drawing made by the great Flemish artist Peter Paul Rubens, which was presented to the university in 1954 by a Professor James Anthony Betts. Measuring just 10 centimetres high by 8 centimetres wide, this subtle and intimate portrait was made around 1922, making it one of the earliest works in our collection. Not only was Rubens one of the most successful artists working in the 17th century, he was also an important diplomatic figure, working for the greatest courts across Europe. He spearheaded a large workshop in Antwerp, where his studio pupils and assistants helped him create a prolific number of altarpieces, portraits, landscapes, and historical paintings. This portrait, which is a preparatory study for a larger painting, depicts the powerful Marie de Medici, who became Queen Consort of France after her marriage to Henry IV. After her husband's assassination in 1610, she served as regent to her son, the future Louis XV, and encouraged the marriage of her daughter, Henrietta Maria, to the newly crowned King Charles I of England. Indeed, Rubens would go on to spend many months in England in 1629, where he completed several commissions for Charles I, including the new ceiling of the banqueting house at Whitehall. Marie de Medici was one of Rubens's most important patrons, and she commissioned from him a suite of 24 allegorical paintings which depicted, and indeed embellished, her turbulent life. Our drawing is a study for the face of Marie de Medici from one of these paintings, which can now be seen in the Musée du Louvre in Paris. Though Medici was known as a notoriously formidable figure, I think you'll agree that Rubens has captured the Queen with a soft expression. Given that this drawing is unusually intimate, some have even said unflattering, we might assume that it was intended for the artist's personal use only. Now, I mentioned that this drawing had been gifted by an anonymous friend of Professor James Anthony Betts. Betts led the School of Art at the University of Reading from 1933 to 1963, introducing a degree programme in fine art in 1937, and boosting the profile of the school by inviting influential artists to give lectures and classes. Not only was he a significant figure in the School of Art, he's also a key figure in our collection's history. An important artist himself, he firmly believed that access to art was one of the best ways to introduce students to great artists. He assembled a collection of master drawings to teach his students about different historical movements and schools, and this Rubens drawing is one of those that he used. However, when this drawing was given to Betts in the 1950s, it was actually thought to be a copy by Rubens, or at least by someone in his circle. It wasn't until 2013, when the drawing was taken in for conservation, that the university realised it was by the artist's own hand. As art historian Professor Anna Grutzner-Robbing said in a BBC article at the time, "A Rubens in the cupboard, it's just not what you expect to find." Now, I want us to jump from 17th century France to 19th century England to examine some truly revelatory drawings by a lesser-known artist named Minnie Jane Hardman. In our collection, we have around 125 drawings made by Hardman, all of which are rather extraordinary because they give us a very rare and comprehensive insight into the formal training of a woman artist in late Victorian England, when female students still faced greater institutional barriers than their male peers. Minnie Jane Hardman, who was born Minnie Jane Shoebrook, but for the sake of consistency, I'll refer to as Hardman during this talk, studied at the Royal Academy of Arts in London between 1883 and 1889. As we know, the Royal Academy of Arts is the oldest art school in England, and in 1883, when Hardman was admitted, it was still the favoured destination for academic training and for exhibiting one's art at the fashionable annual exhibition. 1883 was only a little more than 20 years after the RA first accepted a female student in 1860, and that, I might add, was purely accidental. Laura Herford submitted a drawing signed only with her initials, and this was accepted into the schools because the committee presumed that she was a man. When Minnie Jane Hardman joined the RA, women were still not allowed to participate in formal life drawing classes, to study the nude, or even the partially draped nude. Yet despite these gendered restrictions, female students found ways to subvert this rule. For example, on your screen, we have 3 technically sophisticated studies made after a plaster cast named Discophorus, or the discus bearer, that Hardman produced in 1882 to 1883. What I find incredible is that these drawings were produced before Hardman was officially enrolled at the RA schools, so she was around 19 or 20 years old. You see, if a student was presumed good enough to study at the RA, they were first admitted as a probationer. They were then given 3 months to produce a series of drawings in the academy, including a skeleton and an anatomical figure. You can see a crown stamp at the bottom of the first 2 drawings, underneath the outstretched foot. You'll have to trust me that this states examined schools works, indicating that these 3 drawings were accepted by the Council of the RA as showing sufficient promise. These academy drawings are highly worked in a painstakingly smooth pencil. If we look at the écorché drawing, which shows the human with the skin removed in the centre, Hardman has numbered and identified the imaginary muscles of the anatomized Discophorus on the right-hand side. But you'll notice that the genitals are noticeably left out. In the first drawing in the series, Hardman has drawn and labelled with impressive technical skill the Discophorus with an imaginary human skeleton. Thanks to these works, Minnie Jane Hardman was admitted to the RA schools. Shortly after she was accepted as a full student, she signed a petition that called for women to be allowed to access the semi-draped model as part of their training. The petition, which received 90 signatories, said, and I quote, "We beg to lay it before your notice that almost all of us rely on the profession we have chosen as our future means of livelihood. Therefore, a class which is considered so essential to the training success of male students must be equally so to us." The petition was overturned by the General Assembly at the RA, and women were forbidden to study even the partially draped model until 1893, by which point Hardman had left the RA schools. Now, before we move on to paintings, the final drawing that I want to introduce you to is by an artist who you may be more familiar with, Walter Richard Sickert. We have 19 drawings by Sickert in our collection, and this one in particular is one of my personal favourites. Some of you may have seen this drawing when it was loaned to Tate Britain's Sickert retrospective in 2022, where it helped make the case for the artist's role in shaping modern British art as we know it. Born in Munich in 1860, Sickert moved with his family to England when he was 8 years old. Though he considered a career as an actor and always held a deep love for the theatrical, he eventually went on to train at the Slade School of Fine Art in London, and then he became a pupil and assistant to James Abbott McNeill Whistler, whose works we also have in the collection, but which we don't have time to discuss today. After his training, Sickert was one of the central figures in various avant-garde groups. He was a founding member of the New English Art Club, which was formed as an alternative to the more traditional Royal Academy, and he also became the leader of the Camden Town group of artists, named after the area of North London in which Sickert lived in the 1890s and again in the 1910s. For those of you who are familiar with Sickert's work, you'll not be surprised that I'm showing you a nude. Sickert was notorious for his nudes, though they actually form only a fraction of his extensive oeuvre. He had very strong views on this subject matter. He urged artists to modernise and realise the nude as a plausible representation of an individual, and not as an idealised figure. What he wanted from his nudes, and indeed from art more broadly, was, I quote, "the sensation of a page torn from the book of life." The work we are looking at here, drawn in 1902, is one of Sickert's earliest attempts at capturing the nude. Made with pencil and chalk, a female figure is lying on a bed, with her back towards the viewer. The light falls on her shoulders and the raised curve of her bottom. The metal frame of the bed can be seen in the foreground, and if we look very closely, the torso and soft curves of another female figure, cut off at the breast and the hips, can be seen behind it. Inscribed Neuville 1902, this image was drawn in Dieppe, the popular Normandy resort that captured Sickert's imagination from his earliest days as an artist. The location also gives us a clue as to the identity of his model. It's likely that the figure lying on the bed is Augustin Villain, a local fisherwoman whose home and bed Sickert shared at the time. This drawing marks the beginning of Sickert's sustained engagement with the female nude. The iron bedstead that you can see in this drawing became a regular feature, as did the various rented rooms in France and England, which he employed as his stage. In 1905, Sickert began to exhibit his nudes in Paris to general acclaim. But in Britain, critics strongly objected to their subject matter. Images such as this, with a naked woman in a dimly lit room, lying on an iron bedstead with crumpled sheets, implied poverty and prostitution. Yet despite this criticism from the contemporary British press, Sickert's ordinary female bodies, depicted in their everyday interiors, would go on to inspire generations of British artists, from Lucian Freud to Francis Bacon to a personal favourite of mine, Jenny Saville. The Sickert drawings came to the University of Reading once again via Professor Betts. Indeed, Sickert was to have a commanding influence on Betts's teaching at Reading, though that is a story for another day. For this next collection highlight, we will remain in the 20th century, but we will move forward from drawing to a distinctly graphic medium that is neither drawing nor painting, but that brings together line and colour, the art of the pastel. This technique, which experienced a golden age in the 18th century, enjoyed particular currency with portrait painters, for it created the textured effect of the skin like no other medium. By the late 19th and early 20th century, pastel once again became a favoured technique for modern artists, who used it to capture nature en plein air, or to portray modern city life. The pastel on your screen was created by the Jewish-American artist Max Weber, who you may know as one of America's earliest and most influential modernist painters. Weber is best known in the USA for introducing the radical art movement of Cubism, whereby artists transformed everyday objects, landscapes, and people into geometric shapes. The University of Reading owns 14 very rare paintings by Weber. We have the largest collection of his works outside of the United States. But who was this revolutionary artist, and how did his works make their way from America to Reading? Born in Poland, which was then part of the Russian Empire, Max Weber emigrated to Brooklyn with his family in 1891. He went on to study in New York and Paris, the latter, of course, seen at the time as the epicenter of the Western art world. In Paris, he gravitated to avant-garde circles, meeting Pablo Picasso, Henri Rousseau, and Henri Matisse, the latter with whom Weber studied in 1907. After returning to New York 2 years later, apparently when he ran out of money, he established a reputation as America's leading importer of European modernism, whilst developing his own identifiable and sometimes controversial abstract style. Our painting is one of Weber's earliest works, created in 1912. The intertwined angular shapes in this work invite closer looking, though it's not long before one notices the female figure dressed in black in the left-hand forefront of the work. The title of this piece may explain the subject matter a little more. This is called Dancing Figures, and Professor Grutzner Robbins has suggested that the two figures in the forefront of our work could be Ruth Saint-Denis and Ted Shawn, both pioneers of modern dance who later married. Ruth sported a smooth black bob with a fringe, whilst Ted had a sharply peaked hairline, and both regularly performed barefoot. This energized dynamic composition captures the motion of the dancing figures. The bold diagonal lines and the vibrant color palette evoke the vitality of turn-of-the-century Manhattan and its modern urban spaces. The work also bears witness to Weber's inventiveness in the pastel technique. The extraordinary texture, luminosity, and brilliance of the blues, yellows, oranges, blacks, and greens leads me to agree with the curator Lloyd Goodrich, who said, Weber's New York pictures express the sensation aroused by the whole new spectacle of city life. But we once again return to the question of how these works arrived in Reading. The origins of the Weber collection lie once again with a university academic. Professor Donald J. Gordon was a distinguished scholar of Renaissance literature in the Department of English, but he also had an interest in the relationship between writing and contemporary art. He discovered and patronized the work of an innovative abstract photographer named Alvin Langdon Coburn, and arranged the only retrospective of Coburn's work to happen during his lifetime, which took place here at the University of Reading. As thanks for Professor Gordon's support, Coburn eventually gifted a body of his work to the university, and this included a number of paintings and drawings by his dear friend, Max Weber. Now, the penultimate work that I want to discuss this evening is one that is currently on display in the University of Reading's main library at our White Knights campus. This monumental work is titled Willesden Junction, Early Morning, painted in 1962 by the British artist Leon Kosov. This work arrived at the university in 1965, where it was gifted by the Calouste Foundation, whose purpose is to improve the quality of life for all through art and education. Though I would argue that Kosov is one of the most accomplished British painters of the late 20th century, he has been unfairly overshadowed by fellow Brits like Francis Bacon and Lucian Freud, thanks in part to their colourful personal lives. His paintings, like those of Frank Auerbach, are amongst the most moving and powerful expressions of post-war sensibility. As Jewish artists heavily impacted by the war, they were driven to create art that was potent and passionate, and that offered opportunities for rebirth and renewal. Born in 1926 to Ukrainian Jewish parents, Leon Kosov grew up in a working-class household in the East End of London. He was not, he insists, from an artistic family, but during the Second World War, when he was evacuated to King's Lynn in Norfolk, he was encouraged by his host family to pursue drawing. He went on to study at St. Martin's School of Art, as well as the Royal College of Art, but his most formative training was in the classes he undertook at the Borough Polytechnic in South London, run by the artist David Bomberg, who himself studied under Walter Sickert. Bomberg's radical approach encouraged students to engage intensely and emotionally with the subject, and I quote, to keep the paint moving. As we can see, his tutelage had a deep impact on Kosov's development and working practices. Leon Kosov had a deep attachment to his native city, and throughout his life he felt compelled to draw and then paint the streets of London. He also obsessively pursued a single subject or area over a period of years. Willesden Junction, where the artist lived from the early 1960s, was one of these. Kosov said, and I quote, "London, like the paint I use, seems to be in my bloodstream. It's always moving, the skies, the streets, the buildings, the people. Something happens when you see Willesden Junction stretching out in front of you. What else can you do but draw it?" Kosov's semi-abstract drawings and paintings of this scene reimagine the gritty reality of his beloved post-war city. The mood of our painting is intense, the pace is fast. Multiple railway tracks speed into the centre of the composition, where gantries and bridges can be seen overhead. The sombre, earthly browns, whites and blacks of Kosov's dark palette make the scene hard to decipher when you're up close to it. One needs to take a step back to identify the railway junction through the mass of paint applied in thick, numerous layers. Indeed, this is a painting on board, not canvas. Given the weight of the impasto, which you can see, especially at the bottom, extends far beyond the edge of the hardboard support, a canvas support would have simply yielded too quickly. Now, I want to end this talk by looking to the future and highlighting how the University of Reading's art collection continues to develop apace. Over the years, we have continued to acquire paintings, drawings, prints and sculpture relating to the university and the town, including examples made by important artists such as Kathleen Hale, Alan Seaby, Terry Frost, Stephen Buckley, Marilyn Hallam, Clyde Hopkins, Bob and Roberta Smith, and Robert and Emily Gilmore, just to name a few. However, I want to talk about this pioneering work on your screen, titled Climate Stripes, the first digital artwork to enter our collection. In 2018, Edward Hawkins, who is Professor of Climate Change here at the University of Reading, created an artwork called Climate Stripes for the Hay-on-Way Festival. He has since created more iterations of Climate Stripes, including this version here, and we actually have two in our collection. This striking image is a series of vertical coloured bars showing the progressive heating of our planet since 1850. Each stripe represents the average temperature for a single year. Shades of blue indicate cooler than average years, whilst red shows the years that were hotter than average. The stark blend of deep red stripes on the right-hand side of the graphic shows the rapid heating of our planet in recent decades. This work reveals how artists and scientists can collaborate to use data visualization techniques to communicate scientific research. And indeed, after Climate Stripes went viral, it has become a global phenomenon. After Professor Hawkins tweeted the image, the American meteorologist and CBS weather presenter, Jeff Baridali, printed the stripes on his tie and encouraged other broadcasters and meteorologists to do the same. As Professor Hawkins has released this image on Creative Commons and allowed everyone to share and copy the stripes for any purpose, you too are encouraged to do the same. Hawkins has said, "While the climate stripes have now been used across the world by millions of different people and organisations, their purpose remains almost identical to when I first created them: to spark conversations about our warming planet." That we have acquired these climate stripes into the University of Reading's art collection is an apt artwork on which to end this talk. The quality of our eclectic collection, from digital art to 16th century old master sketches, owes much to generous individuals who have donated works over the years. Like our University of Reading alumni, Bob and Roberta Smith, we feel very strongly that everyone should have the opportunity to be inspired and engage with art. And today we use the collection for teaching and learning, for students and the wider public. The acquisition of climate stripes reveals our ambitions. We want our collection to resonate beyond the university, to engage and inspire audiences around Reading, the UK, and indeed the world. Thank you for listening.